What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Whatcast. We hope you're doing good. Mike, how are you over there? Hopefully not covered in snow. Hopefully it's...
If I was covered in snow at this point, there'd be a huge problem. Way too late. It would kill all my plants. I've got all sorts of stuff blooming. It's wonderful. I love this time of year so much.
Nice.
A lot of work, though. A lot of work to put in, but it's my favorite time of year. Well, second favorite time of year.
Yeah. We had a couple of days of heat over here, and I was like, oh, God, make it cold again, please.
I went out and I was doing yard work over the weekend, and it was like high 50s, but it was a beautiful, clear day, and we had gotten a load of rocks, a truckload of rocks dumped in the driveway that I had to spread along our landscaping in the backyard, and we got enough to add another layer we already had stuff set up, but we wanted another layer. So anyway, it's almost 60 degrees. I'm out there sweating my ass off, and I'm a dumbass. I know that temperature doesn't have any bearing on sunburn, but I was thinking it's not even 60 degrees. I'm fine. I ended up with such a fucking bad sunburn, dude, because I was out there for like 6 hours, and my neck and shoulders and upper arms are so fucking red.
That
got like
sucks.
the farmer's tan going.
I hate that. I burn easily myself.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I've had sunburns where like I've had quarter-sized blisters on my back.
Ew, gross.
Yeah, it was fun.
Doubt it.
There's a sad story behind it too.
I was tied in the middle of the desert and staked for the vultures, and I broke out and I fought my captors off. Meanwhile, the sun was beating on my back and burning me alive. After several days of fighting and crawling through the deserts, I finally crawled out, and down the road was Reno, Nevada. And then I had a beer and fucked a hooker, and here I am.
I wish it was that cool. Jeez. No, I'll take this out, buddy. I'll take this out.
What a dick.
Oh, yeah. But she was just like the biggest cunt I've ever met in my life. Like, I hate that person.
It sounds like it. Fuck her, man.
Yeah, like she had
Good
friends there with
gravy.
her to laugh too. I was like, okay.
Piece of shit.
And that's my life.
Our lives were the 80s. We rode bikes without helmets. We were fucking crazy.
After dark.
Yeah, after dark. Exactly. We didn't have cell phones.
Yeah, we didn't give a fuck if the street lamps were on or not. That didn't mean go home for us.
I had to pop in for some dinner, then I was back at it. Man, I used to do all sorts of wacky shit back in the day.
Oh, it's when life was good, you know? It's not even
Yeah.
It's not about responsibility and all that shit. It's just when times were simpler.
Yeah. But also, it was a time when you could fuck up and not have it documented and then post it all over something where everybody else could see it.
Or better yet, post your own fuck-ups so everybody can see.
Yeah. Yeah. But isn't it weird that, like, in today's age, like, our kids and people in general are more connected than they ever were. But you have... Parents are more overprotective now, and kids are more standoffish.
Yeah, they are.
It's so fucking weird. Like in an age where we are more connected than ever in human history, parents are like, I can't let my kids go anywhere. Dude, they literally have a tracking device on them. Like, fucking simmer down. And I'm guilty of it too. But like when your kids are out and you call their cell phone and they don't answer, then you start freaking out and you're like, oh my God, why aren't they answering? Meanwhile, we didn't have fucking cell phones. Our parents didn't know where we were unless we didn't come home. You know, like if we're not home, then that's when it's time to panic. But otherwise, they're out with their friends and it's fine. But it's fucking weird, man.
Yeah, it sure is. Isn't it? Can you imagine though? Like just I can remember plenty of times where something happened to where I got home super late, and it was like completely innocent. Like I got a flat on my
Yeah.
bike, or like somebody's parents like eat dinner here, and I tried to call home and nobody answered. Shit like
Right.
that. But they're just like, even my parents back then would be like, "What happened?" I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Dude, I ate at Jim's house," and they're like, "Okay."
Yeah. I remember getting in trouble one time because I was out with my friend, and I told my parents I'd be home at like 8 or something. And his parents picked us up, and then they're like, "Oh, we're going to Friendly's." And this is again a time before cell phones. So we go out to eat, and I don't have any way to call my parents cuz I don't have a cell phone. They weren't really a thing at that point in time. And then I get home, I'm like an hour and a half late. My parents were super pissed because they're like, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know where you were. And then I explained everything, and it was cool. But they were like, that was, I almost got in trouble for that. But when you're a kid, this was a time when if you had to call home, you had to find a quarter, and then you had to find a payphone.
Yep.
And, a lot of times as a kid, I would just be out gallivanting around without, not even a wallet, let alone a quarter.
Yeah.
I'm 11 years old. What the hell do I have a wallet for?
I had my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle official fan club card.
Nice. Yeah. You probably would want to get a wallet just for that alone.
I did.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
It was hand stamped, for Christ's sakes.
It's official.
Yep.
That's how you know.
So we're going to talk about a fun one tonight. We've talked about a few cases of this nature before, but I'm always excited to hear of another one. Mike, what are we going to cover today?
We're going to talk about the Highgate Vampire. But it might not even be a vampire, though. Maybe it's fairies.
Like always.
Maybe it's an alien. Maybe it's Mr. Burns. Who knows?
I mean, I really hope that's the case, like with all these different alien races we hear about. I really hope that in the plethora that we'll be informed of when all disclosure happens, that there's out of the 500 races, there's 2 that are just vampires.
Oh, God, that would be the worst. I would absolutely hate that.
I want it to be like a compendium of like a bestiary of all these aliens.
Yeah, that would be very cool to have the monster manual of alien races.
Yeah.
I want to know what the Grey's armor class is.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's been dubbed the Highgate Vampire because of a lot of things that happened down the line.
Oh,
Initially,
I thought it was because of a very high gate. Sorry.
No. So Highgate is the name of the cemetery where these sightings have taken place.
Oh.
The sightings themselves, the first reported sightings took place in the late 60s, 1969, I believe. By this point, the cemetery, which has a long history, it used to be a place where the fancy rich people would get buried, but by the late 60s, it had kind of fallen into disrepair. It wasn't being used, and a lot of the areas were overgrown. And because of that, it became a spot for a lot of alleged magical practices and devil worship and all the usual shenanigans. But there's a road that goes through it called Swain's Lane, and it runs right through the graveyard. And there were 2 people who claimed that they had an anomalous sighting of some sort well out on the road. One old lady said she had been walking down with her dog when she saw this tall, dark figure with glaring eyes that seemed to be floating towards her. And as it got closer to her, she said that the air around her began to turn cold, and like you get in ghost sightings where the temperature just drops drastically. And she took off, and when she turned around again, it was gone. Around the same time, there was another sighting. This one was from an accountant who had reported his sighting while he was in the cemetery. And he said he was walking through the cemetery, and this is a huge cemetery. And again, at this point, it was fairly overgrown. And he ended up getting turned around and kind of got lost while he was walking through the cemetery. And so he's trying to find his way out, and he starts hearing this distant bell. So he starts walking towards the sound of the bell, hoping that by finding the source of the bell, he'll be able to find a way out, or maybe another person that can point him in the direction of the exit. But the bell continued to toll. He started moving, he kept moving towards it, and he suddenly became aware that he was being followed. And as this awareness kind of crept over him, he noticed the temperature also starting to drop, and he was starting to get a chill. So he turned around, having a feeling that something was watching him, and he saw this tall, dark figure that looked at him with this really intense stare, and then it just vanished before his eyes.
Ooh, so he saw this thing disappear.
Yeah, just whoosh, gone. So there was this local guy who is practicing Wiccan named David Farrant, and he began to investigate these sightings. His idea to investigate was to spend the night in the graveyard, and he was suspecting that it was probably somebody that was dressed up in a costume that was out there trying to scare people, or that it might be a sighting, like a mistaken sighting of an animal or something. But Farrant thought that the likely culprit were pranksters that were kind of jumping on, at the time in London, which is where Highgate Cemetery is. There were a lot of stories in the newspapers about vampires. So he thought maybe someone was taking these stories and using it to kind of try to scare people. But he settled in for the night and was just kind of hanging out in the cemetery, being a guy. And he said around midnight, he caught sight of a 7-foot tall figure that appeared to be floating just above the ground. And as the figure kind of turned to face him, he saw 2 points of intense red light. So I would assume these would be the eyes. And once this thing turned on him, the entire area turned cold. He said that it felt like he had just stepped into a refrigerator. That's how cold it got. And he got the impression that this figure was draining energy from him, and he started to feel kind of hazy, like his mind had a fog over it. And he said that it started to feel like it was a vivid dream that he couldn't wake up from. Once he came to this realization, he realized that this was some sort of attack on him, and it might not be a physical attack, but something was draining his energy. So as I mentioned, he was practicing Wiccan, but he also was familiar with other forms of mysticism. And once he realized that this thing was trying to drain energy from him, he started reciting an incantation from the Kabbalah that's used to dispel evil. And once he started repeating it, the figure disappeared. But because of this experience, he no longer thought that this was a prankster, that this is now something more than just a normal human. So he believed the reports at this point. So in February of 1970, David Farrant wrote a letter into the local newspaper, which was called the Hampstead and Highgate Express. But for short, a lot of people just referred to it as Ham and High. But his letter that he wrote in was asking anyone if they had seen anything strange around Highgate Cemetery, and or if they had seen anything similar to the reports, anything like that. But a number of people actually wrote back saying that they had seen strange things in either Highgate Cemetery itself or along Swains Lane. The problem is a lot of the reports that came in, they were all over the place. So it wasn't like this uniform description. There was some descriptions that said that there was a tall man who was wearing a hat, like a top hat. There were some that reported seeing a ghostly cyclist, so a ghost out for a leisurely bike ride. There were sightings of a woman dressed in white, which is pretty typical. One person reported, this is kind of creepy, but a face that was grimacing through the bars of the gate of the cemetery.
Ugh.
Just this face looking out at them. And then another person saw this pale figure float out into the pond that's on site. And then there were several reports where people didn't see anything, but they heard the sound of bells chiming where there shouldn't be any bells, or voices where there was nobody around. But for the most part, none of the sightings were uniform. They were all over the place. But after all these letters coming in, there was another local man by the name of Sean Manchester who became interested in all these sightings and started to draw his own conclusions about what this thing might be. And he started to put out the idea that this was a vampire that was brought to North London and buried in the Highgate Cemetery. So with that theory in mind, and because, as I mentioned, vampires seemed to be hot in the news at the time, the newspaper on February 27th, 1970, put an interview in the newspaper with Sean Manchester entitled, "Does a Vampire Walk in Highgate?" And he outlined his theory. And this, I love this. He actually referred to this vampire, the vampire of Highgate, as the king vampire of the undead.
Yes.
So his theory, or the story he's going with, and it didn't seem that there was any. It's hard to say how much of this is based on historical fact, and it's easy to say that a lot of this is a theory that the Sean Manchester guy just kind of rolled with after possibly learning of a European noble being buried in the cemetery. But his theory of the king vampire of the undead is that this was a vampire who was an aristocrat and a practitioner of black magic in Romania, because fucking of course it was from Romania. And he had been transported to England in a coffin in the early 18th century. So he would have had some followers or a cult or something that would have brought him to the cemetery in the early 18th century. So his followers brought him to this area, and they interred him into a site that would later become the Highgate Cemetery. So at this point in time, the Highgate Cemetery was not the Highgate Cemetery.
Ooh.
But he was interred into this area, and then around there, the Highgate Cemetery was formed. In addition to interring him into this area, they being his followers or cult or whoever, purchased a house for him on the west, or in the West End of London. There are some similarities here to Dracula, by the way. The whole buy a house in London for the vampire when he comes and all that shit. But Sean Manchester then goes on to claim that the reason that the vampire hadn't been seen until just recently is because there have been rituals carried out by Satanists in the cemetery. And these rituals reawakened the evil presence, which brought him back from his super slumber. And now he's ready to suck the energy from people that want to walk through an abandoned cemetery. So that's his whole thing. But as part of this interview, Sean Manchester claimed that he had conducted his own interviews with several people in the area who had experienced vampiric activity. There was one schoolgirl named Elizabeth Woodila. She had seen the vampire when walking down Swains Lane. And she said after witnessing the figure, the tall black figure, she began to have nightmares. And in her nightmares, something evil, there was this evil entity of some sort that would come into her bedroom. And allegedly, 2 wounds appeared on her neck one night. And she started to display symptoms of anemia. So once they noticed that, her boyfriend, along with the help of Sean Manchester, filled her room with garlic, crucifixes, and holy water. And as soon as they did that, her condition started to improve. He also spoke with another young woman that he just referred to as Jacqueline, who said that she had woken up in the middle of the night to find something cold was clutching her hand. And she tried to pull her hand away. And she said the next morning when she woke up, she had these deep cuts in her arm where she had to force this gross, cold thing from her hand.
Ugh.
And she said soon after that happened, both her and her younger brother started to develop this weird fascination that almost called them to Highgate Cemetery. And she said it wasn't like a normal thing where they would feel compelled to go, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they would just constantly feel compelled to go to the cemetery. He also said that he had many people that contacted him describing a tall, dark being with blazing red eyes that was witnessed in the cemetery. Now, one thing he did not prove, however, like I mentioned earlier, was he had no proof for any of these claims, really. It's all just hearsay, especially about the vampire coming from Romania. At one point, and there's a little bit of a contradiction here, but at one point he said that the article where they talked about that was journalistic embellishment. But he wrote a book about this in 1985, and in the book, he does mention that at one point there was a foreign nobleman's coffin that was brought into Highgate and buried, but it was actually brought into the cemetery, so it wasn't before the cemetery. But he did make claims about the Satanists, but there was actual occult activity that was taking place. David Ferrant, who was the first researcher I was talking about, he said that in his investigations, he found a lot of discarded remains from occult rituals. He said he would find stubs of black candles. He would find pentagrams on the floors of tombs. There was various occult symbols that were painted on graves, things like that. And he also believes that these sort of activities may have awoken something that was laying dormant there. But he does not believe that it's actually a vampire. He thinks it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, that's why he thinks that things picked up in the late 60s and 70s. But apparently there was reported sightings of something similar during the Victorian era. So there was something seen then, which I believe around that time was the rise of like spiritualism and seances and that type of stuff. So that could have been, a reason they were conducting that sort of ritual or experimentation and caused something to wake up, and then it went dormant, and decades later someone else did the same thing.
Right.
But this occult activity that took place in the cemetery, it was so much that the police at the time were actually aware of it, and they had been called out to investigate this on many occasions. David Farrant himself had confessed to using this cemetery for his own Wiccan rituals. Nothing satanic. His stuff was all based around Wicca. But he said it was more because the rituals they were doing was more because it was an outdoor space that was secluded and open. So it was kind of everything that they needed to conduct some of these rituals. So that's why. But he claims there was nothing satanic. They weren't summoning demons or anything like that. But around this time, there was a revival of spiritualism and mysticism and all that going on. And people started looking into the teachings of Aleister Crowley again. And there was Christian mystical sects, a whole bunch of different things that kind of seemed to spike in interest around this time in London. And both of these researchers seem to think that this activity is what caused whatever this thing is to come back. So the Hampstead and Highgate Express continued to follow this story. They would conduct interviews with Farrant and Manchester off and on for the next few months. In March, they published an interview with David Farrant where he made reference to the fact that dead foxes continued to be found in the cemetery, but there was no real explanation for how they died. Manchester actually backed that up, claiming that he'd also seen dead foxes, and he suggested that the vampire drained them as a food source. And because the cemetery wasn't a high traffic area, that maybe it was feeding off of animals rather than people. But then, of course, rumors start to spread out, and this sort of thing becomes that the animals were found drained with all their blood, or their bodies drained of all blood, and their necks ripped open, and make it more sensationalist than it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But as the reports continued to come in, it started to gain national attention throughout England, and it even started to get picked up by the BBC network. And then the international news, Reuters, also picked up the story. So it was being reported on all over the place. And there was, are you at all familiar with the Hammer horror Dracula movies?
No.
With where Christopher Lee was Dracula.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Sorry, Hammer production. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there were a lot of people drawing conclusions that this was maybe hysteria due to these the recently released Dracula movies from Hammer. There's actually one called Taste the Blood of Dracula that was released in 1970 that was actually shot in Highgate Cemetery.
Oh, shit.
1 year before the first sighting happened, it was filmed.
That filming could have wakened something up.
Maybe.
Christopher Lee prancing around there could have woken something up.
Yeah. But as things kind of ramped up with the sightings there, David Farrant and Sean Manchester started to develop a rivalry. And I should mention, so I already said that David Farrant was a practicing Wiccan, but Sean Manchester was an exorcist. And so they started to sling some mud, talk a little trash about each other's skills as an exorcist. So, of course, Sean Manchester, believing himself to be as an exorcist, being the authority on the subject, claimed that David Farrant, who was a Wiccan who practiced magic and stuff, was not equipped to take care of this. And then David Farrant would say, well, he's only an exorcist. I have the power of magic on my side. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's magic no matter what way you cut it. If God is imbuing you with magical powers to dispel demons, that's fucking magic, man. I don't care what you say. So we now have a vampire and a wizard rivalry.
Fuck yes.
And it's each side of the wizard rivalry had their own investigation group, and they were like the Ghostbusters, basically, except, they were just different crews of Ghostbusters that had a rivalry with each other. So obviously Mateo and I are not British in any way, but from what I've heard, and I guess to a certain extent it is true around here. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Friday the 13th marathon on TV on a Friday the 13th, but apparently on British TV, at least in the 70s, when there'd be a Friday the 13th, a lot of networks would air paranormal shows or investigations, or they would kind of center around something spooky and supernatural. So on Friday the 13th in March of 1970, there was a show that aired on ITV featuring David Farrant and Sean Manchester, as well as witnesses that claimed to have seen supernatural figures or entities around Highgate Cemetery.
Nice.
In addition to interviews and everything, there was actually a live crew that was reporting outside of Highgate Cemetery. Within 2 hours of this show being aired, hundreds of people from the area roll up to Highgate Cemetery ready to fight fucking vampires. There were so many people that showed up. The cops came trying to stop them, and people were just jumping the fences, pushing through. There's pictures of a newspaper, or pictures from a newspaper, of people actually climbing the fence of Highgate Cemetery trying to get in. But people showed up. Some of them just showed up out of curiosity. Some of them showed up with actual weapons, looking through all the tombs and graves and trying to find this vampire to kill it.
Fuck yeah, dude.
So then the news crew starts interviewing these people, and they're saying that they're determined to put an end to the evil vampire and put him to rest for good, and all that happy horse shit. But I'm sad to report, not a single vampire was found that night.
God damn it.
Even though some people did claim that they saw a shadowy figure. But
it
could have just been somebody else, prancing around the cemetery.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if there's that many people flocking to this area to hunt the vampire, there's at least 6 drunk dudes who are dressing like a vampire. Yeah.
So Farrant, throughout all this hysteria, started to get pissed off, and this kind of the vampire talk was starting to piss him off, and as a result was starting to make him more pissed off at Manchester, because he was claiming that the hysteria within the media and the sensationalist headlines are turning what some sort of actual supernatural entity into a vampire, the type of vampire that everybody is familiar with, and he's claiming this is some sort of other entity.
Okay.
So there was a disagreement there, and it was basically an exorcism pissing contest. But during that night, as people are swarming over the gates, Sean Manchester and his crew of vampire hunters made their way to the entrance of one of the catacombs. And Manchester claimed that this particular catacomb was pointed out to him by a young girl who had been led there while sleepwalking. And in his interview with her, she had told him where this catacomb was. And she said that the Highgate Vampire had lured her there, and she started to exhibit similar symptoms to Elizabeth in the earlier case. So they, following this girl's directions to where this particular catacombs were, they tried to open the door and they couldn't get in. So they were able to get through a window, and they used a rope to climb in through the window. Once inside, they found that it was this big vault that had it lined with coffins, basically. But Manchester claimed one of these coffins was a sinister-looking casket made of black wood, and it stood out from the rest, which were just regular caskets. But this one was apparently an ornate casket made of black wood. And Manchester and his companions tried to exorcise the vampire. So he performed his ritual of exorcism, used holy water and garlic, sprinkled salt around the casket, and basically hoped for the best at that point. Rather than try to stake it or burn it or decapitate it, they tried the exorcist way. So things were relatively uneventful until the first day of August, where a charred and decapitated corpse of a woman was found near that particular catacomb.
Jeez.
The police, when they investigated, had a suspicion that this was a corpse that had been taken and used in a black magic ritual. This, to both Farrant and Manchester, indicated something more was going on. So they both start to become more active in their investigations. Farrant was actually arrested by police in the churchyard next to the cemetery. For all his claims that this wasn't a vampire, do you know what he was arrested with?
Oh shit, what?
A crucifix and a wooden fucking stake.
Ha ha! It's for rats, bro.
That's some classic vampire hunting shit right there.
Sure.
So maybe
is.
Manchester won him over. But so he was arrested, and when he was brought to court, the case was dropped and he was released. On the other side of things, Sean Manchester and his Ghostbusters were following the advice of a psychic woman. And so first time he was led to the catacombs by a sleepwalking girl. This time he's being led by a female psychic wizard lady.
All right.
Well, I guess saying female and lady is redundant, but she's a psychic wizard lady.
Yeah.
She might not be a wizard. I'm probably just throwing that in. She's just a psychic. She's probably lovely. She probably makes really good oatmeal cookies. It doesn't matter. She's a psychic and she's leading them places. So she takes them. She has a vision that they have to go to this particular family vault on the grounds. And she takes them to the place. Of course, it's a vault, so the doors are locked. So what do? Just some light breaking and entering. No big deal. They're dead. It's not like they're going to give a shit, right? So they force the doors open. They go inside. And what do they find in there, Mateo?
Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Exactly. And she kicked them all in the... No. After forcing it open, they go inside and they find the fucking same black casket from before that was in the catacombs. Now it's in this family crypt.
Oh, shit.
So, suspecting that this vampire knew that its hiding place had been found and was not happy with the attempted exorcism, called upon its cult or followers or what have you to move his casket. So, to prevent this from happening again, he pops that fucking lid open. And then he said that when he looked upon it, he had absolute confirmation of what they were dealing with. And what they were dealing with was a goddamn vampire.
We knew it all along.
We did. We called it. Manchester wanted to drive a stake through the heart the old-fashioned way, but one of the other Ghostbusters said that you can't kill a vampire that way because interfering with the remains of the dead is a crime punishable at the court of law, and you can't do that to vampires. So, because it's illegal, he decided he would not impale the vampire, and instead he performed another ritual. This one, he said they used 7 crucifixes, lit 4 white candles, had 7 cups of holy water, and carried out a ritual to banish the spirit of evil. And then he reported it to the news, who then put it out to the masses, and everyone thought, well, this is it. He dispelled the vampire with his Christian voodoo magic. After the ritual took place, Manchester had the officials brick up the vault, but he left a crucifix and holy water inside. But, according to Manchester, the vault did not remain bricked up for long. Dun dun dun! Or did it? Or was it ever bricked up to begin with?
Ooh.
I guess it all depends on what sort of faith you put in Sean Manchester.
Right.
So on the other side, back to the David Ferret group of merrymakers, they decided they were going to try to communicate with whatever this entity was to try to figure out what it wanted and why it was showing up. So they also got the help of a psychic, but this was a medium, and using their Wiccan voodoo magic, they were trying to cast a spell using magic circles and candles in connection with the medium to reach out to whatever this thing was. They had tried once, and the press got wind that they were doing it, and they got interrupted, so the ritual was incomplete. They waited a whole other year to make another attempt, and this time they made contact, and apparently whatever this entity was did not enjoy being contacted in that way, because he grabbed the medium by the throat, and in order to break the hold, they had to get rid of the circle, and then the area turned cold. And he said that the medium reported that she was being enveloped by complete blackness, and in the blackness she felt something try to strangle her, but she couldn't make out what it was. So now Ferrant knows that whatever this thing is, which again, remember, he was arrested holding a crucifix and a stake, but he's now finally convinced that this thing, whatever it is malevolent and wants to harm people. So at this point, he came to the conclusion that this was not a vampire. This was an evil presence that traveled along a ley line. Now, this particular ley line started at the columbarium, which is the part of the cemetery of Highgate Cemetery where the urns of the cremated are kept. And then this ley line runs across Highgate through 2 old pubs, goes through Highgate Wood, and through a apartment complex over the top of a nunnery. So he starts looking into these places to find out what's going on. And he found that there was evidence, or reports, I should say, not evidence, reports of supernatural activity that took place in these places. And some people that he interviewed mentioned seeing a tall, dark figure. There's a manager from one of the pubs that saw something so horrific that it turned his hair white, and he now has white hair.
Oh, shit.
And in one of the apartments above the nunnery, the room had to be exorcised because of some evil presence that was there. So it seems like whatever, but I mean, I don't know. I guess it really depends how much credence you put into ley lines and shit, but it goes to show that weird things happen along ley lines. And it's also kind of weird that there's always holy sites on the ley lines as well. So, I mean, maybe it is a figure that's kind of confined to the ley lines, and that's where it derives its energy from. I don't know. But despite Sean Manchester's 2 attempts at an exorcism, strange occurrences continued.
As they should.
People kept reporting sightings of this entity. Strangely enough, or maybe not so strangely, because again, this is one person telling the story, but Sean Manchester claims, again, 3 years later, that he and his Ghostbusters were investigating the cellars of an abandoned mansion that were on the borders of Highgate. And in their investigation, guess what they found? They found that fucking black casket again.
Are you serious?
According to Manchester, that's what happened.
Oh, shit.
So he suspected after they bricked it up, the followers of the vampire took the casket away and brought it to this mansion. So this time, they dragged the coffin out of the basement where they found it, brought it upstairs into the grounds of the mansion, and morning was about to break by the time they brought it outside. They removed the lid, and he said he saw the same thing that he saw when he opened the casket the first time. But he said this time it looked even more distorted. But its eyes were open, and he said its eyes were yellow at the edges with blood red centers, and it had a furrowed brow, and the mouth was set in a cruel expression with lips that were drawn back. So at this point, Manchester says, fuck the exorcism, and he drives a stake through this fucker's heart.
Yeah.
And he said as soon as he impaled its chest, the shell of its body caved in and turned into this filthy brown sludge.
Fucking ew.
And in my head, do you remember the video for Sober?
Dude, that's exactly what I was thinking.
When he falls back in the chair and his head crushes open and it looks like caramel flows out. That's what I picture. But after he impaled it and its chest caved in and turned to slime, he decided he was going to set this fucker on fire to prevent him from ever walking again.
Fuck yeah.
So him and the Ghostbusters gathered up. They burned the body inside the coffin, and he said it took several hours before everything burned. All that was left was some bone fragments, which they threw into the 4 winds.
So there was bone fragments in that sludge?
Yeah, the whole body didn't turn to... It was just the chest that caved in and turned to sludge.
Ugh.
Yeah, gross. But at this point, Manchester claimed that Highgate Cemetery has been purged.
This house is clear.
Yeah, exactly. Despite this claim, Ferrant didn't give a fuck, and they continued to feud. They had a planned magician's duel that they were going to enact on Friday the 13th in April of 1973.
Oh, shit.
They talked so much shit. They were getting their magical arsenals ready. They were fucking pumped up, and it never happened instead.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. The following year, David Ferrant was again arrested at Highgate Cemetery. This time he was arrested under suspicion of vandalizing memorials and interfering with the remains.
God.
When he was, he claimed that the damage were caused by Satanists. It wasn't him. And but there's no proof that it was anybody other than him. He was there, and he ended up getting arrested and was imprisoned for it. But that kept the story alive. And then even after that, the feud dragged on for decades and decades. They both claimed it basically centers around these guys having a magical pissing contest. They were both claiming to be expert exorcists, and both claimed that the other guy sucked at being an exorcist. And that's really what this whole thing was about. Like, no, I'm a better exorcist than you. No, I'm a better exorcist. I killed the vampire. No, the vampire's still alive, and he's not a vampire, and I'm going to take him out. But they both spent many decades after investigating paranormal activity around. They both wrote books. Eventually, with the rise of the internet, they had stuff on the internet, talked to anyone that would listen, or gave interviews about the Highgate Vampire. They would also take jabs at each other on social media, which then prompted their followers to also join in. And no, my wizard guy is better than your wizard guy. Well, your wizard guy sucks. My wizard guy's the best wizard guy. He's killed so many vampires. Vampires don't exist. They're demons, and my vampire killer guy is way better because he understands that and fights the demons. You can't kill a demon, stupid idiot. God, the internet's dumb. But sadly, David Farrant died in 2019 and never reconciled with Sean Manchester. They hated each other's guts till he died.
Hell yeah. Fuck that guy.
Sean Manchester still works as an exorcist, however, and he is actually a bishop in the British Old Catholic Church.
Oh, shit. Don't fuck that guy.
It's different from Roman Catholicism, but it's a conservative sect that actually broke away from Roman Catholicism. So it's a different, I guess, slightly more conservative take on Catholicism. But he claims that the Highgate Vampire was just the first, and he's destroyed dozens of vampires since then.
At Highgate?
No, different cemeteries. Maybe I'll do a quick and weird on him sometime, but he's done one at Finchley's Great Northern London Cemetery, and this was in the 80s. But there's an interesting story about that, so I might do a quick and the weird on that.
Nice.
So if you guys want to hear more about that, join Patreon. We'll do an episode on that at some point. But even though it's claimed to have been destroyed, there has still been sightings of this even through the 90s, and I don't know. Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe it's a different one. Maybe there's an army of vampires that live there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like something definitely was going on there. It's such a long stretch of time to have sightings by so many different people. It's so interesting to see that the feud almost possibly inspires charlatanism. Do you think dude was going back to that graveyard and maybe destroying shit to blame Satanists so he can get more buzz to go back there and him fucking destroy a vampire?
That wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Wow, yeah. Just goes to show you, even people who are claiming to want to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, look at the ghost hunter shows today. You know, they're out there claiming to help people clear ghosts. Meanwhile, they're in there with a camera crew making millions.
Yeah, calling shit out and making shit happen.
Yeah. So, and snake oil salesmen have always been a thing. There's always charlatans. There's always con men. Call them what you will. And it seems like in the magical community, in the new wave community or new age community, there seems to be a lot of that. And here it seems like we've got two grifters that are grifting away. I mean, that one dude has the audacity to claim he's killed dozens of vampires.
Right.
Like, in my opinion, that means you dug up a bunch of corpses and fucking staked their hearts. Or you're just a blatant liar. Or both.
Yeah, just one photograph.
Yeah. But I mean, if there was something really going on, it could be a negative entity, because the coldness always goes along with that. They do seem to feed off of negative emotions like fear and anger and things like that. So it would make sense if that was the thing. And maybe somebody did accidentally summon something. Kids do dumb shit, and sometimes they get their hands on the wrong books and they do dumb shit with those books. Or they invite the wrong entity through a Ouija board. Like, remember the Zoso case?
Yeah. I remember watching a documentary not too long ago about satanic cults, and the person doing the documentary just goes to a public park. I think I've mentioned this before, and just walks around and points out things that are basically like residue and evidence of satanic rituals that are going down there. And he's like, we're in the middle of like suburbia here, so something like that definitely could have happened, but it just seems like whatever it was overshadowed with this duel that these guys were having. Like, whatever was there, maybe they did kill it, but it just took a back seat to them beefing it.
And even after they were done with it, they were still beefing. They didn't give a shit. Just two stubborn wizards refusing to back down.
Back when people had follow through.
I hope when Sean Manchester dies that their ghosts somehow stick around, and just out of spite they both stick around, refusing to move past their feud, and they got to finally have their wizard duel, but as ghosts.
Yeah, dude, that dude will pass, and then his ghost will appear, and then another ghost will appear of other dude, and he'll be like, at last. And there'll be like the
last thing that Sean Manchester sees is the ghost of David Farrant standing at the end of his bed with a smile. And he just mouths. He doesn't even say it. He just mouths, "I'll see you soon."
Yeah, he's like, "I'm gonna fuck you up, pal."
Yeah, and he's had a few years to practice now. So
yep,
he's probably got this ghost thing down. He's like cracking his ectoplasmic knuckles. He's ready to throw fists. Ectoplasmic fists.
Ghost fists.
Yeah. He's going to splatter that entire room with ectoplasm.
Oh, it's going to turn into a different kind of fight.
Yeah. It's going to look like Stan Marsh in the No Internet episode of South Park.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.